Okay, our next speaker is John Burgess with Mainstream Technologies, and he's going to talk about remote workforce issues. Mr. Burgess is a co-founder of Mainstream Technologies and has served as president since its inception in 1996. And during this time, Mainstream Technologies has grown from 3 employees to a staff of over 70, serving clients across the U.S. He's also worked at Arkansas Systems and Dillard's. John's the chairman of the Little Rock Tech Park Board, whose focus is to enhance the local economy by catalyzing job creation and growing and retaining the supply of tech talent. And he's also the chairman of the Engineering and Information Technology Leadership Council at UA Little Rock. Welcome, John.
Thank you, Kim, and good to see everybody on this brisk Saturday morning. Let's see, and do I have control, Matt?
You do, sir. You do, sir.
All right. Oh, there it goes. Okay. So, like Kim said, I'm the president of Mainstream Technologies. We were founded in 1996. We have headquarters in Little Rock, downtown Little Rock. We have an office in Conway, and at least since March, we've got employees scattered, hither and yon. Now up to 3 different states and counting. When previously we were all kind of, our culture's always been to meet in person. All right, this thing froze up again. So quickly about Mainstream is we create, manage, and secure technology. We create technology through our outsourced software development services, which we provide to businesses and governments. We manage technology through our managed IT and hosting services. This is still not working right. There we go. And then lastly, we secure technology through our managed cybersecurity and consulting services. So I want to preface everybody back to March 12th of 2020, earlier this year. That's the day that Governor Hutchinson announced that he was closing all the public schools in the 4 counties, including the 2 where Mainstream Technologies facilities are located. So I'm going to go ahead and jump out there and say that what I'm about to say would have been a great presentation 8 months ago. But I think it's still a good time to talk about remote work because, a lot of us may be sitting around not being confident in our ability to do it even today. 8 months ago, we may have implemented this as like a temporary measure, with the 2 weeks to flatten the curve kind of deal. And we're still wondering if we could have done it better. With 8 months of experience under our belts, we all may be thinking that, remote work, and we've heard it already, that it's more viable than maybe we previously thought. And we want to embrace it or explore it. Brett was just talking about work from anywhere and work remote as kind of emerging core strategies. And then there always might be another round of shutdowns or snowstorms or whatever. So I wanted to talk about our journey through this. And our journey actually starts back several years as how we got to COVID land. So kind of our profile is that 75% of our revenue is derived from billable hours. That's our core business is our software development services, and that's all time and materials type work. An advantage that we have is that 95% of the services we deliver to our customers are performed remote to those customers. So they have no idea really where we are anyway. In fact, for several years, one of our kind of informal taglines was, why outsource overseas when you can outsource to Arkansas? Like I mentioned briefly earlier, historically, our culture was very much around in-person collaboration. So we believed very strongly in central locations, that in-person collaboration and those synergies that we got from those creative collisions that our people had in the hallway and over the wall and around the coffee pot. So Christmas of 2012, most of Arkansas had a record snowstorm. My house, I was personally out of power at my house for 6 days. But we had, travel and electricity disruptions for several days around the state, particularly in our region. And at that time, many of our workers were still using desktop computers. So we're sitting there with a large portion of our workforce idled, not generating any billable revenue for that period of time. So shortly after that finished, we started planning for that next event, literally the next month. Got through the holidays and immediately started working on how we were going to address that in the future. So over the next 5 years, we transitioned our company to 100% company-owned desktop, laptop workstations. So portable computers that were all owned and controlled by the company. We've also continuously invested and upgraded our connectivity and our collaborative tools. So we've already, Randy mentioned, the increased use of VPN. But one thing we had discovered in that snowstorm was that we didn't have enough VPN capacity. So we invested in that. So we always had it. We have standardized on Teams as our collaboration platform. We were already working toward that. And we opened our second office in Conway about 4 years ago. And that had kind of pushed us also toward, whereas before that, everyone had been in person in Little Rock. Now we had to figure out how to collaborate digitally across even just a 16-mile period, because we had teams that were split. We had functions that were split across the two offices. So that second office helped kind of ease us into this work from anywhere and remote kind of posture. So the results of that is that, since about 2018, every worker in our company has had the ability to occasionally work remotely. We have a very flexible time policy. So, someone needs to stay home to meet a contractor or have a sick kid. They've always had the ability to stay home and work like that. So, because of that, on any given day, pre-COVID, about a fifth of our workforce was not in the office. They were working at their houses or wherever they happened to be. One key facet of this that I want to hit on a little later is that we regularly conduct cybersecurity awareness training for our workforce. We recognized early on that they were susceptible when they were susceptible to agree when they're in the office. They're even more susceptible because there are different tactics that attackers can apply when they are remote. So that's been a key part of our strategy in positioning ourselves to be able to do this. So literally, my two partners were in my office 30 minutes before the governor made his announcement, talking about how we felt like we needed to invoke our work from home plan on March the 12th. So we did a voluntary work from home plan. We have never officially told anybody to leave, but we told everybody they could leave. That was 90% adopted within 5 days, and it's been operating effectively ever since. We opened our offices back up officially in July. We told everybody that, hey, we've got everything in place. If you feel like coming back, that has not been widely subscribed to, but we feel very strongly that the planning and exercising of our work from home strategy, going back to that event in 2012, positioned us to have a very seamless, secure, and successful transition to a pretty much a fully work from home situation. So we kind of use a hybrid approach here. We kind of touch on a different type of implementation models, but I wanted to bring these up just for consideration. Regarding your software, historically, pretty much every piece of software you used was installed directly on the machine you were using, kind of the robust workstation model. That has the advantages of being more self-reliant. There's not as many connectivity requirements, but also that gets into patching issues and control issues, versioning issues, licensing issues. But there's still a significant amount of the software that we use that is delivered this way. We also, over the years, with the rise of cloud and software as a service models, some portion of the software that we use is hosted as a service from third parties. So again, that has the advantage of the care and feeding of that software is kind of assumed by the vendor. It does introduce some connectivity requirements because a lot of those tools, if you're offline, you're not working. But especially for a lot of our kind of non-core systems, our supporting software SaaS type offerings, are a good fit for us. And then we have a blend of a remote desktop and virtual desktop type technologies, which is kind of the modern day equivalent of the old mainframe, a hub and spoke model, where you have a very beefy core, has the advantage of being centrally managed, has the advantage of less bandwidth and less computing power required at the endpoints. It's also a fairly easy model to stand up in a hurry. If you need to, it's easy to deploy a terminal server and train somebody up on using a remote desktop client rather than have to deploy remote software or connectivity. Randy hit on this earlier about that they had adopted a blend of company-owned and personal-owned, BYOD type devices as they deployed their workforce remotely. Like I just said, we had done ours from a very much a company-owned. We wanted to have control of our machines, mainly from a security posture standpoint. We felt like that we're not regulated ourselves, but we have a number of regulated customers. We're SOC 2 audited. So we felt like that the requirement that we have a consistent picture of our security posture and fewer moving parts to manage, was strategically better for us. Then we have a blend of connectivity options across the workforce. Obviously, some of them are wired directly into their home networks. That's obviously much more secure. It's much faster, but it's not always convenient. So a lot of our employees are using home Wi-Fi. Has the convenience factor. It's also extensible. I don't have to sit at the one desk. I can move around in the location. I can move to different locations. And then we have some workers that they're not off the grid, but they're pretty close to the edge of it, where Wi-Fi is not really and broadband is not really a good option. So we have some employees that are reliant on cellular hotspots to deliver a wireless experience, which is it's more secure than Wi-Fi, not as robust as wired, obviously, but it's a good hybrid option. I want to talk briefly about what we see and as far as how our workforce is under attack from as an issue, how all of our workforces are under attack as remote workers. The good news, I think, is that the hackers are using the same tricks they've always used. They've slightly tailored some of those tactics to address a remote workforce, but by and large, cyber criminals are using the same tricks they've always used. Namely, they're using social engineering attacks. A lot of phishing and spoofing type attacks, spear phishing. They've tailored them somewhat to bring the sensationalism of the pandemic and lockdowns and those kind of things. Recently, we're seeing more increases in election-related phishing campaigns, especially smishing campaigns. Text message thing. I'm getting, I don't know what list I got on, but I'm getting 5 to 10 of these a day. I don't know if they're legitimate or not. I assume that they're not. But again, the attackers are leveraging they're using age-old tactics, but they're adopting the context of the attacks to take advantage of remote workers. Obviously, a phishing attack goes along with a spoofing, and they have the same old purposes. They're only after money, and the two vectors that they're using, that they're using the phishing and the social engineering attacks for are to either download malware or to steal credentials or information. We don't see it. They're constantly evolving their approaches, but these kind of are the big ideas about how they historically attacked us and how they continue to attack us. What I do see is that the pandemic and working remotely, that they are providing more opportunities for these tactics to succeed. And what I mean by I think my theory there is that, okay, we sent all of our, your Easter eggs are always more secure when they're in the refrigerator the night before Easter. Easter morning, you put them all out in the yard, and then inevitably they're going to get stepped on and they're going to get lost. So we've done the same thing with our workers and our key information assets. We've taken them out of our central lock boxes and we've pushed them out into the world. A lot of times very quickly and kind of very ad hoc in a very ad hoc fashion. So we got workers that are out there on the edges who aren't really, they may not be as comfortable with these new collaborative tools as, we think we are in the technology space. And that makes them susceptible to social engineering attacks. So they see an unexpected pop-up. Well, they don't know if it's a function of this new software that I'm having to use, or if it's an attack. And we see cases where the attackers are very much, tailoring kind of these, some of these, again, these existing tactics, these spoofing tactics, to emulate problems with collaborative software. So that's kind of the new wrinkle, is that we have introduced it ourselves by pushing our employees and our assets out beyond our perimeters, and the hackers are preying on those potential weak spots. So I wanted to talk briefly about what can we, what are some things to think about as you consider a remote workforce. First and foremost is you have to have a culture of security, and the embodiment of that culture are written formal policies that clarify your expectations and your standards for employee behavior. That covers most of us probably have policies and procedures inside. We just need to make sure that those policies address a remote work environment, including, family members' access to machines, clean desk, auto lock policies, those kinds of issues, sharing Wi-Fi, or what the rules are about using public Wi-Fi. There are just different scenarios that we need to consider in our existing policies to cover these new scenarios that our workers are going to be faced with. Endpoint security obviously becomes much more important, keeping software patched, anti-malware type protections. Historically, there's been a suite of products, some that were deployed at the endpoint, some that were centrally managed and deployed. The good news is that a lot of those tools are kind of there's the new acronym is EDR, Endpoint Detection and Response, which is collapsing a lot of these protective and detection technologies into kind of single platforms that can be deployed to the endpoints and provide a push that protection barrier out to the end. A lot of this has become capable. Computers are always getting faster and better. So a lot of these tools that we could, 5 years ago, it was cost prohibitive to buy a big enough workstation to deploy like a SIM tool, a log monitoring tool. You deployed those on your central servers and your network devices, but it didn't make sense to deploy them on endpoints. Well, progression of hardware, improved software. Now that SIM and that log monitoring functionality is feasible to put on an endpoint, and you absolutely need to consider it, because now you've pushed your endpoints outside your perimeter into the great unknown. Your network is probably the weakest thing now. So the use of VPN, the use of personal firewalls on endpoints, setting expectations. Again, you pushed your devices out into, you're putting your network connectivity at the mercy of your employees and their neighbors and their kids, in the coffee shop. So, policies and tools on the workstations to enforce wireless security become even more important. It's all well and good to have a bulletproof machine, but if the connection is weak between there and provides an opening for an attack, then they're going to take it. Informing your associates about no default settings on their network equipment. Change the password that's written on the bottom of the router when you buy it. Change it to something else. Those kinds of things. Segmenting your personal networks to separate work and personal traffic. Those are all just considerations to think about. Authentication becomes much more important. Unique identifiers for your people, a strong password policy. If you haven't deployed multi-factor authentication, you need to. Your workers are more exposed. The risk of compromised credentials increases. Multi-factor is a great, reasonable alternative to to restore the security of those credentials in the event of a compromise. You know, a lot of us have deployed very sophisticated and comprehensive monitoring strategies around our networks and our systems to detect suspicious and malicious activity. As we push our devices and our workers out into the world, we just need to consider that are our tools still functioning as effectively as we need them to? Compromising our security by moving remotely is really not an option. So, just be cognizant that the tools that you have deployed may not be functioning effectively when that workstation is sitting out at the end of a personal network. Also, make sure that if you have network baselines on traffic, that you've retuned those or analyzed those to handle these new, possibly unexpected data flows. That you may have significant flows in and out of your network from a legitimate endpoint, so it may generate false positives. But also, if you don't have that kind of technology, now there's a lot more noise to hide a true, malicious breach happening. Then kind of hitting back on our workers again, tool and environment familiarity. You got to make sure that your workers are trained up on these new tools that they're using. The hackers are going to leverage their unfamiliarity with their tools and their new environment in a social engineering attack. So making sure that your people are trained on, if you're using Teams, here's the FAQ for Teams. This is how you troubleshoot it yourself. This is our process for how we're going to how it should work. So just make sure that before you send them out, do a little training for them on how the new tools work. And then lastly, can't reinforce, your workers are always one of the weaker links. They are simultaneously your first and last line of defense against an active attack. So training them to recognize the threats that target workers, how to safely deal with them, and making sure that they understand this culture of security that you're going to deploy and their role in it. Reinforce safe behavior with your workers. So one big one is keeping work and personal life separate. If a worker's sitting there and they're getting their personal and their work email in the same Outlook client or even on the same machine, an attack that targets them personally, you don't want that bleeding over and affecting your business. So some training and even some policies on keeping personal life off of a business computer. And that's a two-way street. If you want them doing business at home, then I believe personally you ought to provide them a business machine. But at any point, making sure that they understand the risks that they pose to the company by conducting personal business and having personal digital connections on company assets. Always beware of public and unsecured Wi-Fi. That's is the coffee shop Wi-Fi really the Starbucks network, or is it a pineapple that someone's deployed there to type signals? Who's bringing some other device into your house? One of your kids' friends. That they may be playing around, but they may be exposing you to unwanted exposure. Is your worker using your neighbor's Wi-Fi? Are they pooling resources to share Wi-Fi? So just beware of the risk associated with an unsecured and unencrypted wireless connection. I mentioned this earlier. Workers that are working from home, they need to have a workspace that they treat like their office. So maintaining a clean desk policy. If any of you are HIPAA regulated, there are requirements about not leaving sensitive information out on desktops, making sure that the machines lock when you step away so that, someone's kid doesn't step in, and with a kid, you're not so worried about them seeing something sensitive, but you're worried about them clicking on something and downloading some malicious payload. So kind of workspace hygiene when they're working remotely is just a thing to mention and to raise their awareness about. And then lastly, stop, look, and think. If you get a suspicious email, once you've trained them on how to recognize these, stop, closely look at the email to make sure that it passes the SNP's test, and think about all the steps about how to recognize it and how to safely deal with it. So then kind of wrapping up here, your resource investment and your security strategy very much depends on your implementation model. If you're going BYOD or company-owned devices, if you're going purely cloud, or if you have a hybrid, or if you're going remote desktop or installed software, where you spend your money to do effective work, remote work, a lot of the drivers of where you spend that money is going to be driven by your implementation strategy. Very key to verify that those protective and those detection technologies that you have in place, that you've relied on these years, that they are still effective now that you've pushed a lot of your endpoints out into the world. Again, keep work and life separate and in balance where possible. That imbalance part, I wanted to bring up that this is something that we've observed recently as we've gotten into months into this deal, is that this new digital world that we've created is still not a substitute for a lot of in-person social interaction. And I think as we get into this further, we're going to see that really disconnectedness and a lack of engagement are going to become real issues that we need to figure out how to address. You hear about Zoom fatigue. The question came up about what's the policy about cameras on versus cameras off. So just be aware that because your people seem to be working effectively in their main functions, that they need some human interaction. And so far, the tools that we've deployed aren't really checking 100% of those boxes. So finding a way to keep the pulse of your workforce as they continue to work remotely, I think is going to be increasingly critical as we go down the road here. And then, like I said, safe behavior by your workers is even more important than it was when they were in the office. So that's everything I had today. I want to thank you all for joining us, and I'll take any questions, or I can hang out on the chat and do it that way, depending on the schedule.
I have a quick question. Have you seen that your employees are using their personal email addresses, their personal equipment for work purposes? And so I'm really talking about data loss prevention. Have you experienced this as an issue?
We haven't seen it as an issue, as far as we haven't experienced any direct loss, like you mentioned, data loss due to that. It is something you got to watch out for. That your email client on your phone kind of sometimes makes it hard if you want to. It makes it very convenient to see all your email flows in one place, but it also sometimes makes it difficult to make sure that you're responding on the right account. So those are these same tools that are making it more convenient for us to blend our lives also make it harder to separate our lives. And that's kind of the issue we run into is these integrated email clients that, something comes in on the work thing and you accidentally respond to it on the personal thing, or, vice versa. A kind of a mobile device management software is good for that, keeping up with that. What sensitive data do you have on these devices?
Okay.
Thank you again.